do 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 ba 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 ba. I really shouldn't be this hyper because it actually is late at night. Hey y'all, it's Ashley back-ish room. Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookish Room, and I'm here to talk about the best books of 2023. So my reading year last year was really good. I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books, and I am going to be having a video coming out talking about how I was able to accomplish that, especially with the schedule that I have, because it's one of those questions that does come out at the end of the year, like, how are people reading this much? And it's a time thing, it's a scheduling thing. That's how it ends up happening, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But this was one of the best reading years that I had, not just talking about the numbers, but in terms of ratings. I had an average of a 4.0, which typically is not that high. I usually fall anywhere between like a 3.5 to a 3.8. And so what I saw is that last year I was picking out a lot of things that I was enjoying. I was focusing on children's lit, which is, 90% of the time it's a hit. And so we ended up with a really great reading year last year. So I decided to do something a little different with my best of video this year. And instead of me just doing like a top 20 generally, I did a top in every age category that I read. So I have a younger section, I have a middle grade section, I have a YA section, and I have an adult section. And that is simply because I do not rate any of these categories the same way. I don't even review them the same way. If you're looking for my best of for the manga, comics, and graphic novels, that will be coming out on my Realm of Comics channel sometime next week. But for right now, we're going to talk about the 5 best books in these categories. This was very hard. I sat down and I was doing this video. This is actually my second time filming this, and I did 10 in each category, and it just ended up being incredibly too long. I was getting filming fatigue doing it, and I was like, you know what? Nobody's going to want to watch this, because 9 times out of 10, even this video is going to be a little bit on the lengthy side, and so I thought I would cut some of that content down. Hopefully what will end up happening is that with the weekly wrap-ups, and I plan on also doing the best and worst of the month and then the best and the worst of each quarter, hopefully that'll better prepare me to narrow down these titles by the time we get to the beginning of next year. So let's go ahead and jump in with our younger titles. Okay, so when I say younger titles, this was an opportunity for me to kind of take into account all of the picture books, board books, beginner readers, and early chapter books that I read last year. And even in kind of, analyzing all those things, I came up with the top 5, and they're all picture books. It just happened to work out this year, or work out last year that way. I think this year we may see a little bit of a difference, because I plan on reading a lot more beginner readers, a lot more board books, and definitely continuing on with some of the early chapter book series that I was reading. So the first one I'm going to talk about is An American Story. This is by Kwame Alexander, and I knew that I was going to really love this one in general just because it's Kwame. I have not picked up anything by Kwame that I haven't absolutely adored and enjoyed. This one came from an inspiration of like his own personal life, where he had an experience with one of his daughter's teachers that did not know how to teach about American slavery. And she didn't know, it's not that she didn't want to cover it, but it was this question of, how do I teach a group of young kids about this very dark aspect of American history, but at the same time, it's so vital to their education. So as we go through this picture book, you are seeing this kind of back and forth of questioning, like, how do you engage in these conversations when so many pieces and parts of it are so tragic, so dark, and are essentially just, they're woven into the American story. The artwork in this one was phenomenal. Derek Coulter did such an amazing job with this one. I definitely feel like this one will potentially receive a Caldecott this year. We'll see. By the time that this video goes up, it will probably be around a little over 2 weeks before the Youth Media Awards comes out, so I'm really interested in that. The next one that we have on this list is That Flag. Now this one I primarily picked up because of the illustrator. The illustrator had also done the work for Born on the Water, the 1619 project, which was written by Renee Watson. And I simply went in for the art and got a wonderful story out of this. This focuses on two young kids that are best friends. It's a black girl and a white girl, and they hang out a lot at school, except when they come home, the black girl's parents don't want her going over to the other girl's house, and it's because she has a, well, she doesn't, but her family has a Confederate flag flying in their yard. And so her father takes the time to explain to her what the Confederate flag means and the history behind that. He takes her to a museum and explains all of that. And so she comes back to her friend and she's like, well, you know, if this is what the Confederate flag stands for, like, why do your parents have this in your yard? And it's a big learning opportunity for both of them because they don't really understand the history. And so, you know, with her father explaining it to her, the little white girl, her parents don't really give her a clear cut explanation of what the Confederate flag stands for. It's very much so, you know, Southern pride, and, you know, it's just remembrance of our history, when really we all know that it's a lot more. I grew up in a state where the Confederate flag was a normal part of my everyday, like seeing it not only on like pickup trucks and you know, it was flying on the state house grounds and just pretty much everywhere, but like kids used to come to my high school with Confederate flags on their clothes. And so I just think about now as an adult growing up in that environment and how like bothersome that would be, and still grasping or learning to grasp the concept of what the Confederate flag meant. I really enjoyed that one. The next one that I have on this list is Remember. This is a wonderful, glorious picture book by Joy Harjo. It is a poem that she originally wrote that has been adapted to picture book format, and it is about our interconnectedness with those who have come before us, our family, with nature, and it's just remembering essentially where you come from. It is beautiful. When I tell you, not only just poetic, but the artwork is just amazing. You can see from the cover, it's a beautiful cover, and just one of the most poignant picture books that I read in 2023. The next one that we have is There Was a Party for Langston. This is another one that I think has Caldecott potential. This is by Jason Reynolds. I had high expectations for this because it is Jason Reynolds, and he paired up with the Humphrey brothers for the illustrations. Exquisite. This picture book was one that he decided to create after seeing a picture of Maya Angelou and Langston Hughes together, in which they were having a celebration. And so this picture book kind of celebrates him, but it celebrates all of the wonderful things that Black writers have done to pave the road for Black writers of today. And I know that we have this conversation a lot, especially when it comes to young adult literature, not always giving flowers to those who have come before them. And so I love that this was just his love letter to Langston Hughes, and it was his love letter to the Black authors that came before him. And what I loved about this one is that it definitely had a movement to it. So the Humphrey brothers did a wonderful job pairing the artwork with this kind of like jazz kind of like feel with his words. It's kind of hard to explain. Like, this is one that you literally like you literally have to sit down and read this, because when you see the cadence with which Jason Reynolds writes, and then you see how the artwork like pairs with that, when you read it you kind of want to like bop, but there's no music playing, but they make you feel as though music is playing in the background. It's exquisite talent to be able to do something of that. So that definitely was a favorite. And then the other one that I have on this list, which I went back and forth between this one and The Last Flight. The Last Flight was one of my favorite ones of this year, but I went with The Tree and the River. This is by Aaron Becker. Aaron Becker is known for doing wordless picture books. This is another one that has gotten some Caldecott buzz. When I tell y'all, I absolutely loved The Tree and the River. It is so hard to explain because there are no words, and anything that I explain to you is my interpretation, and Aaron Becker did that on purpose. The premise of the book, or through the illustrations, what you get is that there's this tree and there's a river, and you see the rise of human civilization and the fall of human civilization. And in the course of this, it's almost like he's challenging you to think about whether this is him, you know, giving his perspective of the impact that mankind has on the environment, Or is this kind of like, you know, even with mankind's destructive ways, nature always finds a way to revitalize, rejuvenate itself? Or is nature just, you know, an onlooker to the destruction that is mankind, like, you know, watching us go through these different phases, whether it's successful or a complete failure? This is a picture book that literally, when I tell y'all, after I finished flipping through the pages, I was like, oh my gosh. I went back and flipped through the pages again, and I was like, it made me think so hard. And there were no words attached to this. I would not be surprised if that one is up potentially for a Caldecott as well. But yeah, so those were the 5 younger books that I read in 2023 that are some of my favorites. All right, we are going to switch over to our middle grade category. The first one that I have on this list is Blackbird Fly. This is by Erin Entrada Kelly. Now, Erin Entrada Kelly, this is, I believe, her first book, but she's won a Newbery or a Newbery Honor, one of the two, for another one of her books. But Blackbird Fly was, it damaged me. It broke me because it's not what I was expecting. It focuses on a main character who is Asian and is having a hard time trying to find her place in her, like, her age group and her friend group. First of all, I did not like her friends. Her friends are absolute trash. And she has this love and this passion for music, and all she wants is for her mom to buy her a guitar. She has a father that's not present. She doesn't understand, like, you know, she's dealing with the emotions that come with that. And she's has this idea that her father was really into music, and so she wants to have that connection to it. And Blackbird Fly is an ode to the Beatles. She's very much so into Beatles music. But this is like a coming of age story that deals so heavily with bullying that this is the worst bullying I think I've ever seen in a middle grade book, where you have the middle schoolers coming up with a dog list, which is like the worst looking, you know, girls in their grade level. They tell her that they call her dog eater because she's Asian, so she has to be eating dog. And you're probably like, Ashley, dang, like, why would you like something like that? I think because it is about her journey and, you know, pushing back against that bullying and finding comfort in her identity and who she is. And she has this tension with her mom, which is very realistic, because at that age, I think it's difficult for kids, because you're going through puberty. You don't know whether you want to be a little kid, whether you're ready to be a teenager. It's a very difficult and trying time. And I felt like Erin Entrada Kelly did a very good job of capturing that. And then she gives her a support system. So we're not dealing with a main character who doesn't have the support system that's needed to be successful. She ends up meeting these 2 amazing side characters. One in particular, I loved him because he was the epitome of, I am going to be my authentic self no matter what, and I don't care how anyone else feels. There's always a handful of those kids that exist at schools, and I was so happy to see him, you know, shine. And everything comes full circle at the end. I think she understands why her mother still wants her to hold on to her cultural background, and why she wants her to appreciate that while still, you know, living in a very Americanized way. You know, like, her mom is like, you know, she wants her to, you know, enjoy and eat certain things. She's like, no, I just want, you know, you to buy pizza because I just want to fit in. And so it's a lot. It's a very, very heavy book, like I said, not for the faint of heart. The book starts off and she is eating carrots because they say carrots are good for your eyesight, and she thinks that eating carrots will fix the slant in her eyes. It was tough, but Erin Entrada Kelly's writing is beautiful. It deals with tough topics, but there's always hope. And that's one thing that I love about middle grade, is that it can handle tough topics and it doesn't leave you there. It gives you this lingering feeling of there's hope. It can and will get better. The next one that we have is Ruby Lost and Found. This is another emotional one, because I think I saw a lot of my own experiences in this one, even though it wasn't exact. The focus is on a main character by the name of Ruby, who ends up having to go live with her grandmother during the summer after the passing of her grandfather. She's not handling her grief very well, and she starts to do things like cut school. She loses her friends, and so her parents feel like the best idea would be for her to go stay with her grandmother. On top of that, her parents are, you know, their relationship is unstable. Her sister is not around as much as she used to be. And so she, you know, goes and spends this time with her grandmother. And it's an adjustment for her, but she gets to know her grandmother better. She sees that her grief is not the only grief. You know, her grandmother lost her husband, and so she begins to understand like how even painful that was for her grandmother. But there's another kind of like twist to the story where her grandmother starts doing some things that are out of character, and eventually she picks up on what it is, and so she has to learn how to lean on people and look for support and understand that it's okay to ask for help. This one was just written with so much heart and soul. And you can tell that the author really, really cared about her characters in this. And this was very reminiscent of some of the experiences that I had with my own grandmother. And it's tough. It's tough. And there is no perfect ending to this one. I think this is a happy in this moment. But you know that past this, like past the pages of this book, eventually things are not going to, they're not going to stay good forever. But I really enjoyed that one. The next one that we have, I'm going to show you two books that I have, and these are not the books that I read, but I just want to hold them up. So I read the Braveland series this year. I read books 1 through 4, and I'm going to include all books. When I say books 1 through 4, I'm including all of them. It's not, I couldn't even rank all of them if I wanted to. Y'all, as Ray says, Animal Planet freaking Mafia. So this series is written by Aaron Hunter. This is the same author of the Warrior series, but Aaron Hunter is a group of writers. And this focuses on 3 animals specifically. It's a baboon, an elephant, and a lion. And at the beginning of the series, they all live in the Bravelands. The lion is dealing with issues related to his pride. His father is killed by another lion, and that lion takes over his pride. And so he's kind of sent away, and he ends up living with the baboons and essentially getting raised by the baboons. It's very Lion King-esque in the beginning, which I was like, yeah, this definitely parallels Lion King, but it's fine. It works out in the end. And then you're dealing with our baboon, who is trying to push back against a person that is in his troop that is very evil and vindictive. Really, really evil and vindictive. And then we have an elephant that has some kind of like fantastical powers. All elephants do, where they can read bones and tell you a little bit about the person that has died. But our main character, that's an elephant, has powers that extend a little bit beyond that, which I think is really, really interesting. These are good books for people who like a lot of political intrigue. You don't trust anybody, that you don't get attached to anybody because anybody can die at a this is like Game of Thrones with animals for kids. But it's a daggone good series, and I plan on continuing it. This is the 6th book in the series. The 5th book is somewhere in the house. I couldn't even tell you where, but this is the 6th book in the series. And then there's 2 spin-off series. And as soon as I finish book 5 and 6, I'll be starting the first book in the first spin-off, which is The Curse of the Sand Tongue. And the book itself is called Shadows on the Mountain. And this follows a whole new set of characters. But I have been devouring these books because they are chef's kiss. They are so good. From the writing, the character development, the plot twist. Every time I talk about these books, y'all, I tell people it is drama central. Like, don't know who your real parents are drama. I'm going to kill you drama. Cannibalism drama. It is super, super intense. And the last one that I have for my middle grade one is one that I do not recommend lightly. I would be very mindful of recommending this one to sensitive readers, whether, you know, we're talking about middle grade readers or adults that read middle grade. This is a tough one. Simon Sort of Says. It follows a main character by the name of Simon, who is moving to a new town after he is the sole survivor of a school shooting that takes place in his classroom. So in order to protect him, to get away from the media so that they can live their lives in peace, his mother gets a new job as a mortician. His father gets a new job as a priest, and they moved to this town where they do not use internet. They don't use, so no computers, no cell phones, no microwaves. And it's a side plot that involves trying to make connections with extraterrestrial life. And so they don't want those things to interfere with the system that the scientists in this town have set up. But this one heavily leans into what it's like to be a survivor of a school shooting and the trauma, the PTSD, and the survivor's guilt that comes with that. And so when Simon moves to this new town, he's very excited because it inevitably means that he does not have to worry about anybody figuring out who he is. Of course, we kind of know how that plays out. And he deals with the after effects of that, but he's coming to terms with his feelings. And there were moments where he broke down. There was one specific scene where he broke down, and it made me break down because I said, this poor baby. And I think a lot of it has to do with, this is not like something that's far off fiction that, you know, oh, this will never happen. It is something that is happening right now. And so it felt very, very real. But Erin Bow is a very, very talented writer, not only because she was able to capture so many intense feelings and such an intense perspective from such a young character, but also because this book was funny. And I think that's a very hard thing to do when you're writing about something that is so tragic and so hard, that you're able to then include moments where it's light. And so she would take us on this journey where it would be dark, and then something would happen and you'd feel kind of the pressure kind of be relieved a little bit. It felt like a lighter story. And so she did that very, very well throughout the course of the novel. It's about hope. It's about moving on but not forgetting. It's about paying your respects but knowing that life has to go on for you and you can't stay in that moment. You never forget that moment. You never get over it completely. And you never forget those who didn't make it out of that situation. But you have to be okay with living your life and allowing yourself to be happy. I think he was scared to be happy, but Erin kind of illustrated like, it's okay to feel happiness. It's okay to feel joy. It's okay to make new friends. It's okay to be a kid again. And so such a powerful book. I think this one will possibly get a Newbery, to be honest with you. I'm pretty sure this is getting a Newbery. And I said that was my last one, y'all, but that's completely incorrect. So wrong. The last one that is on this list is The Accidental Apprentice, which is the first book in the Wilder Lore series. So good. This is another just random book that I picked up. This is a middle grade fantasy series about a main character who lives in this town. He doesn't fit in. He's kind of like a sore thumb, and he is an apprentice, and he is not supposed to go into the woods. Nobody is supposed to go into the woods because there's supposed to be all of these creatures, these mythical creatures, and you don't want to interact with the creatures or the people that kind of are around them. And so as it goes, he ends up in the woods, and he ends up binding or yeah, I would say he's bound to now this mythical creature. And it's an interesting magic system because each one of these mythical creatures has kind of like a power level to them, almost like Pokemon style. Like if you think like Pokemon cards and abilities and power levels, like it's kind of that same feel to it. And so he can't go back to his town because once that happens, the townspeople are like, oh, you can't be here because magic is evil. You can't do that. And so he ends up having to go back in the woods and link up with another character who promises to take him to a town that's close by where there's more people like her that can, you know, they can meet with somebody that'll help him remove this bond that he has with this mythical creature. But when he gets there, he ends up having to make this deal, and he has to participate in these series of events. And then the person's like, okay, once you do that, I'll help you remove the binding in your arm from you and this mythical creature. But he ends up learning a lot about himself and that it's okay to be different. This book was fast-paced. This was definitely a good balance of character-driven aspects to it and then plot-driven aspects to it. It was such a beautiful balance of it. I was surprised at how well this worked because I'm a very plot-driven reader, but at the same time, I need there to be some character development, which is going to be interesting when I talk about some books when I do my wrap-ups. And this one did it very, very well. I mean, just exceptionally well. I love like the found family aspect of it because he is already an orphan when you meet him in the beginning of the book. And so he doesn't really have family, and he ends up understanding like, you know, blood does not make family. He learns a lot about being confident in himself And it was good, y'all. Just good storytelling. And it ended in a way that, you know, I had to wait because the wait list for it was so long at the library. And I finally got my copy and I need to read it. But Amanda Foodie, like, she did a really, really good job with that one. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and move to the YA section. I, of course, have 5 in this one, and we're gonna start with We Deserve Monuments. This is by Jazz Hammonds. I read this one at the beginning of the year, and this one really, really spoke to me for a number of different reasons. It follows a main character who ends up having to go back to her mom's hometown with her mom because her grandmother is dying of a terminal illness. And while she's there, she learns a lot about herself, love, relationships, friendships, but it was this rekindling of relationships between families that I really enjoyed. And at this time, my paternal grandmother had gotten diagnosed with cancer, and she had only been given a couple of months to live, and I had to travel to Florida to see her. And I read this right before I went, and I didn't know what I was going to get out of this, and I needed this because it is about healing, addressing the trauma caused by those that we love so deeply but also resent at the same time before our time runs out. And you know, we only have but so much time on this earth. And the writing, Jazz is such a gifted writer, and I hope they write more, because when I tell you the fluidity in which they wrote this book, it is exceptional. It is beautiful, it felt magical, and it was heartbreaking, and it was real, because it was like, dang, like, this is exactly what's, and it, honestly, for me, this is something that I see on both sides of my family, this breaking down of relationships between generations, and a lot of times it's happening with the Black women in my family, and it's so hard to see. But when you think about the trauma and the burdens carried by each one, and they're not healing, and so it inevitably creates this cycle until somebody makes a decision to say, I'm not going to continue the cycle. Like, you see all of that, I feel like, represented in this book, and I need to reread it, but this book came to me at the right time. The next one that I have is 16 and Pregnant. Now, when I originally read this book, I was like, dang, this is going to be a hit or a miss, because it was published by MTV Books, and I was like, oh, 16 and Pregnant. Now, when I read this and really thought about it, I was like, 16 and Pregnant, or when I saw the title and I was like, 16 and Pregnant, I was like, okay, this definitely has to do with the fact that I am building this connection with the TV show. I grew up watching 16 and Pregnant. I'm the same age as the women that were on 16 and Pregnant, like the first seasons of 16 and Pregnant. We are all the same age, and so I grew up watching them, and they were my birth control, because I was like, oh no, honey, like, and now being a mom myself, I'm like, I have no idea how they did that, because it's tough. Parenting is tough. But this one follows 2 best friends. They're super close, and one of them ends up getting pregnant, and it is a difficult journey for her. And what I think I like the most, not saying that I didn't like the relationship between the 2 best friends and them trying to figure out, like, you know, how to deal with the situation, what were their prospects for, you know, after graduating high school, like what's going to happen next. But I think that this was a good representation of ownership of one's body. Like this whole question of who owns your body. And this came about at, I think, at such a pivotal time in US history, especially with everything that happened with Roe v. Wade. And the author did an amazing job capturing the different ways that pregnancy affects women, and that whether someone decides to go through with the pregnancy full term, or whether they decide that they don't want to, you know, that is their decision to make, and the reasons behind doing that are, there's millions. But at the end of the day, that person has to do what is most comfortable for them and what is best for them. I think this book also did a really good job addressing, like, the intersection of gender and race when it comes to birthing experience and being pregnant. Like, overall, because I'm telling you, it's one thing to hear about the experience of being a Black woman in the United States, about, you know, getting pregnant, having to go through labor and delivery, and then experiencing it yourself. Like, I went through some traumatic stuff during my L&D that has inevitably put me in a position where I never want to have another child. Parenting is tough. And, you know, I thought that, you know, I would be the person, because I grew up as a single child. I grew up as an only child. And, you know, I always thought that, like, you know, when I have kids, you know, if I decide to have kids, I definitely, you know, want more than one. After my L&D, I do not want any more. It was very, very traumatic. And she does a great job addressing the issues, the mortality rates, the treatment of Black women, the importance of having a midwife or a doula. I appreciated that because I didn't know if she was going to cover that, and she did, and I was happy to see that. The next one that I have on my list is Delicious Monsters by Lizelle Samberry. This is my first book by her. I still need to go back and read Blood Like Magic and Blood Like Fate, but this was so good. There are a lot of content warnings attached to this, so check them out. This is a young adult horror that approaches horror in a different way. This is another one of those books that talks about the complexity of familial relationships, especially those that exist between Black women and Black girls. And as someone who has had and continues to have a very complicated relationship with their mother, once again, I read this and I was like, well, dang, like, if it ain't the pot calling the kettle black, because I mean, I really, really, really connected with this. And so this is told in two different perspectives, and you don't really understand the connection of the two perspectives until the very end, which I think was done very, very well. But it has a haunted house element because there is this house that changes people. It's supposed to be extremely dark because we have a present day narrative that she's dealing with a mother who says that being in this house really changed her as a parent, but she's extremely abusive towards her daughter. And so she's exploring the experience of another Black girl in this house and the dynamics between her and her mother. And it seems like in the beginning, like really, really heavily about this haunted house, but you begin to learn more about the horrors of the humans that live in this house. And that sometimes what makes the house haunted is not the house itself, but the people who inhabit that house. And that's as much as I want to say, because it, like, I don't want to say any more about it. It's just a beautiful read. Well written, eerie. It took me a long time to read this because of how dark it is and how much I think I felt my own trauma coming through in reading this book, but unforgettable. I loved it, and I really want to. There's two books that I think I want to reread from last year. This year, it definitely would be these two. The next one that I have is The Spirit Bears His Teeth. This is another Andrew Joseph White book. Andrew Joseph White, for me, is becoming an instant favorite author. I read their book Hell Followed With Us last year, and that was on my top books of 2020. Last year, I read it in 2022, and it was on my top books of 2022. And now The Spirit Bears His Teeth is on my top books of 2023. Y'all, this book, it's a historical horror. The first one that I read was a fantasy horror. This one takes place in the 19th century, and it follows a main character by the name of Silas. Silas is trans and is diagnosed with what they call the veil sickness, where violet-eyed women are deemed insane and are sent to how do you say this word, because a sanatorium. Goodness gracious, I was never gonna. They're sent to a sanatorium where they're supposed to be made into perfect ideal women, and it is horrendous. This has a lot of content warnings. This is another one that I say, like, do not take this one lightly, because the content warnings on this, and I'm surprised they're not in here at all. I don't think they're not listed in here, but the content warnings of this one are intense, down to we get some body horror. There's body horror in the first one, but there's body horror in this one related to pregnancy that just made me cringe. But I think that with Andrew Joseph White, as always, with all of their books, there is this emphasis on like social commentary that is phenomenal. The treatment of women in society, medical experimentation, the use of sanatoriums, the unethical use of sanatoriums, the auctioning off of women's bodies for the pleasure of men. I mean, Andrew covers it all. But what I really appreciated at the end of this is that they definitely recommended medical apartheid and medical bondage, and talking about the fact that that is real history and that medical experimentation is real. This is fantasy, but the actual medical experimentation on human bodies, especially black and brown bodies, is real. And so the acknowledgement of that was very, very powerful. The writing in this was very eerie. I listened to this on audiobook, which I highly recommend listening to it on audiobook. It is dark. We have a main character that is also autistic, and we get such a beautiful characterization of him on page. Like, it was just done well. Like, Andrew knows how to write a character, knows how to write a plot, and knows how to make you really think about different social issues. I'm auto-buy, honestly, auto-buy for me at this point. And the last one that I'm going to include actually was a reread for me, and I'm very, very shocked, but it was a reread for me, and it was Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray. Shout out to Robin and Alana for making me finally get through the Divina series this year. I reread the first 3 books for like the 3rd time of peace, and then we finally made it through King of Crows. Now, I had to include this one because, oh my gosh, all the stars in the world. There's not really much that I can say about this one because it is the 3rd book in a series. This is a chunky book, by the way. This book is like close to 600 pages. It's a little over, maybe close to like 540. This is an emotional book. Libba Bray holds back nothing in this one in terms of like character development, character depth, looking at different aspects of history as it applies to our characters, whether that's discriminatory behavior, this eugenics thing that was happening in the 1920s, and it just, she did so much work and research into this, and you can tell. And she does say that, of course, because in a novel she's taking some liberties, but at its core she's addressing the things that we were seeing in the 1920s. And I think what made this book so poignant to me when I first read it is that this came out right before the 2016 election, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was he published in 2000, right after. This came out in 2017, so right after the 2016 election. And a lot of what the rhetoric that we were seeing in the nation at that time was, it was definitely, I'm just going to read you this line. I typically don't do this, but like she wrote in her author's note, which I always read her author notes. She said, "As I write this, we are in an especially divisive era in American politics. There are questions about who holds power, who abuses it, who profits from it, and at what cost to our democracy. It is a time of questions about what makes us American, of shifting identities, inclusion and exclusion, protests, civil and human rights, the strength of our compassion versus the weakness of our fears, and the seductive lure of a mythic great past that never was versus the need for the consciousness and responsibility necessary if we are truly to live up to the rich promise of we the people. We are a country built by immigrants, dreams, daring, and opportunity. We are a country built by the horrors of slavery and genocide, the injustice of racism and exclusion. These realities exist side by side. It is our past and our present. The future is unwritten. This is a book about ghosts, for we live in a haunted house." When I tell you this book captures all of that and more, the historical context of this book, not only in which it takes place, but when it was released, means everything. And that's all. Mic drop. That's all I have to say. pick up the Diviner series, although the 4th book is kind of a disappointment. But that book, 5 stars. All right, and the last thing that we're going to talk about is the adult books that I ended up reading. And I always get these questions about like, Ashley, do you even read adult books? Why, yes, my friend. In fact, I do read adult books. And everyone is always so shocked when I say, yes, I do in fact read adult books. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is I read a lot of James Baldwin this year. And I could not pick out which one was my favorite, but I ended up reading Notes of a Native Son. I read The Fire Next Time. I read The Amen Corner. I read Go Tell It on the Mountain. And I also read If Beale Street Could Talk. Baldwin is an exceptional man. His writing is just everything. His look at the relationship of Black people to the state of America, their role in America, how America treats Black people, his look at his complicated relationship with religion. There's just so many things. His love letter to his nephew, just his essays. I hadn't even known that he had this whole conversation with like Farrakhan at one point. I learned so much about James Baldwin this year, and every book that I read this year by James Baldwin, I gave 5 stars except The Amen Corner. And The Amen Corner is a play. It was a very interesting play because I think that one does a good job of talking about like Black people's connection to Christianity, and then how in the church, how women, Black women especially, are seen in context of the church. It was very, very good. I highly recommend. You can find the play. If you want to watch it, you can find it on YouTube. I did end up watching it as well as looking over some of the text, but there's no words to really describe. I have done a live show. It was myself, Erica from the Broken Spine, and Josh's Bookish Voyage. I always forget Josh's channel. We did a live show for every James Baldwin book that we read last year, and so I'll include some of those down in the description box below because I feel like there's not enough time and space here for me to describe how I felt, and so watching those live shows will give you a better understanding of like how I felt in reading Baldwin. The next one that I'm going to include is going to be Yellowface. This is not only one of my most popular reviews on Goodreads for 2023, it's one of my most popular reviews of all time on Goodreads. My review of Yellowface on Goodreads has like over 2,000 likes at this point, which is the highest that I've ever gotten on a Goodreads review. Yellowface is a very polarizing book. There are people who really, really love Yellowface like me, and people who really, really hate Yellowface. And I think it was kind of like the irony of Yellowface that just made me like enjoy it. I think a lot of people went in expecting to like characters, but when I wrote my review I was saying like, y'all want characters to behave in certain ways because you've been conditioned to believe, especially when we're talking about Asian women, you have certain expectations based on your unconscious bias of how Asian women should perform, how they should behave. They should be quiet, docile, you know, intelligent, and so when you have a main character that breaks those stereotypes, that is not likable, that is not the best person in the world, it throws you off. And then you have a white woman in publishing who does what people in publishing do all the time, which with all the publishing scandals that we had at the end of December, I'm like, y'all, this is what she's talking about. Like, this is exactly what she's talking about. You have a white author who takes the work of an Asian author, spins it as her own, and then plays victim about it, and says that everyone is attacking her and that it's not fair when she's the one that did the wrong. You know what I'm saying? It's a very interesting look at publishing. I think it's a very interesting question of who has the authority to write what stories. I know we get a lot of questions in the book community about like why can't a white author write diverse characters? What makes a person of a certain identity more apt to write this book than anybody else if every community is not a monolith? Like, it raised some very, very important questions, and I think that for me personally, I felt like some people kind of missed the point of Yellowface, the irony of reading it and having expectation of characters based on implicit bias and then reviewing it as such. And I'm like, y'all are missing the point. Like, you're missing the point. She's not behaving. R.F. Kuang is not behaving the way that you expect her to behave and being published. And so she's breaking that mold. She's breaking what people would presume her to be, and it makes people uncomfortable. And she's emphasizing that some authors are tired of being invited to the table and then being told what their lane should be at that table. This is what you should do because this is who you are and this is where we need you to stay. And so, you know, if you don't kind of see it from that lens, I feel like sometimes it's kind of hard to get that book. But I really enjoyed it, y'all. It was very good. I don't think I needed to give a premise for that one because most of y'all have read Yellowface or you've heard a lot about it, but those are just kind of my thoughts. The next one that I have on this list is one that I'm not going to talk a lot about because I talked about this one a lot, and I was supposed to reread it before the end of the year and I didn't get to, but that's okay because listen, at some point I'm going to get the urge and I'm going to read this. This is Only for the Weak by Natasha Bishop. This book was romantic, it was poetic, it was spicy and schemy and tense, and it was about building boundaries and loving yourself and not caring what anybody else thinks. But it does follow a main character whose sister gets engaged to her ex-boyfriend and she's the maid of honor at the wedding. It's messy. It's real messy. And so then her and the best man decide that they're gonna, you know, hook up for a week, but only for the week, and it won't go beyond that. This was good. I'm glad that this was not just beyond like her being able to love herself, put herself first, and allowing herself to be loved by someone else, but drawing boundaries with toxic family members and understanding that like nothing is her responsibility or her fault when it comes to a couple of characters in this. I love this book. I love this book. It's one of my favorite romance books of all time. The next one that I have on this list is The God of Good Looks. This was really, really good. This was good. This is a book that follows a Trinidadian woman who gets caught up in a scandal. She's having an affair with a very high official in the government. Their affair is discovered and she loses everything. She loses everything. And he ends up being able to maintain his marriage. He is still married to his wife. So it comes down to this interesting question of like how women are treated in comparison to men in situations like this, especially in Trinidadian culture. And she's trying to rebuild her life, and so she ends up working for this man by the name of Obadiah, who runs this magazine. And he is not the most likable character, but he is very much so like a Caribbean man. Like, my dad is Jamaican, and so it was not hard for me to understand like his personality, but you get to see him develop layer by layer, and I love just how supportive he was of her. He let her do what she needed to do. It was a solid support system. Yeah, he was hard with her at first, but he was nurturing her to come back stronger. And even in her coming back stronger, I love that she was able to acknowledge like she was coming from a place of privilege and wealth that other women who had been in her situation were not coming from, and did not have the space or the place to be able to come forward, because this man had a track record of picking up younger women, seducing them, engaging in an affair, and really destroying them when it was all said and done. He was treating them merely as objects. And she was the one that was able to get to a point where it was like, okay, well, I think I'm the one that can hold you accountable for your actions. It's not a romance. I think some people may have gone into this one expecting a romance. This is not a romance. This is a fiction book that has an undertone of romance, so don't go in thinking that, but it's very much so a commentary on societal expectations and standards and gender roles and gender norms, and having a main character who's pretty much like, no, if you're going to do wrong, you have to be held accountable for the wrong that you have done. The next one that I'm going to include is The Mountain Sings. This is a historical fiction that takes place in Vietnam, and one that I read earlier in 2023. It was my first by this author, and I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. It follows a main character and her grandmother at the time during Vietnam, and it is a very hard-hitting perspective and look at what happened to people who were in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and the complexity of familial relationships, how the war impacted people in terms of trauma, their ability to take care of themselves, their ability to take care of others, and this relationship that this young girl has with her grandmother, and what she had to do to survive when, you know, she had her kids, and what she's currently having to do in order to survive. The writing was beautiful. There's a lot to the story in terms of like content warnings and how graphic it is, and especially what happens to the bodies of women during this time. There's a lot of discussions about that, but I love that it wasn't just about the war itself, but also like family dynamics and family relationships, because stepping into historical fiction like this, like, I think the history buff in me is really excited to learn about the pieces and parts of history that are not always sufficiently taught or incorrectly taught in, you know, K through 12 education, even post-secondary and collegiate levels. Sometimes it's not always taught right, but I think that, you know, not only just exploring that, but looking at its impact on the family structure is also a unique experience, and I think that that was done very, very well in this one. But it was great. I really did enjoy it. Y'all, those are my top reads of 2023. Let me know in the comment box below what were some of your favorite reads of the year, and also tell me one book that you're looking forward to reading in 2024. All right, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. And if you're looking for ways to support the channel or follow me on social media, all the links will be down in the description box below. And I will be back with another video soon. Bye.
Keep moving like the scars aren't even there. It's in the air like a blazing flare.